Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to learn how to read a map exactly like a Revolutionary War commander. You know, it's easy to think of the Revolution as just muskets and battlefield bravery, but honestly, it was heavily a war of geography. We're about to see exactly how the physical landscape of America shaped the overarching strategy of the whole war, basically deciding who won, who lost, and why. Okay, here's a quick roadmap for our lesson today. First, we'll see how maps tell the war's story. Then look at New England's need for speed and how the middle colonies followed the water. After that, we'll examine the Yorktown Peninsula trap, go over how you can prove it with maps, and finally wrap up with education, morality, and peace.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1. Maps tell the war's story, the foundation of strategy.
Before we even look at the battles, we really have to understand maps tell the true foundational story of the war. They show us why armies moved where they did and why something as simple as a specific river crossing or a dirt road could literally mean the difference between victory and absolute disaster. And this actually ties in beautifully with our foundational spiritual truth today. Psalm 90, verse 12 says, "Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom." You see, paying attention to place and time wasn't just some tactical exercise for George Washington and his generals. It's a spiritual discipline that helps us gain the wisdom to make sound, meaningful decisions in our own lives today.
So, when we talk about geography in war, we're talking about how the physical terrain completely dictates a commander's options. When you're looking at a map, you are quite literally reading the commander's choices. A brutal winter could freeze an army in an exposed valley, right? While a steep mountain range might serve as an impenetrable fortress. Even a fleet of ships suddenly popping up on the horizon near a bay, that can change the fate of an entire nation in a single afternoon. Geography dictates those vital supply lines. It controls the timing of troop movements, and it's the ultimate decider of whether a desperate surprise attack succeeds or completely fails.
Moving on to Section 2, New England's need for speed during the early fighting.
Now, I want you to ask yourself a crucial question as we think about that famous retreat from Concord and Lexington. How did New England's specific geography aid early militia actions? Just picture that landscape for a second.
Well, the answer's right there in the terrain. Colonial New England featured really short distances between towns, and the colonists had this deep, intimate knowledge of their local, narrow, twisting roads. This geography massively favored the Patriots. It allowed riders like Paul Revere to spread alarms incredibly fast across the countryside, like in a matter of hours. And because of those short distances, local militias could quickly communicate, converge in the thick woods, and use some pretty devastating ambush tactics. They essentially harassed the British troops relentlessly during their long retreat back from Concord, striking from behind trees and stone walls before the exhausted British regulars even knew it hit them. Basically, geography gave them speed, and speed gave them power.
All right, Section 3, Middle Colonies following water.
As the war traveled south from New England into the middle colonies, places like New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, the whole strategic focus shifted entirely. So we really have to ask, why did controlling ports and rivers suddenly matter so much to both armies?
It all comes down to logistics. Back in the 18th century, dragging heavy brass cannons and tons of supplies over rough, muddy, unpaved land? Absolute nightmare. It exhausted men and destroyed wagons. Ports and rivers, though, could move soldiers and supplies vastly faster and way cheaper. You can kind of think of the mighty Hudson and Delaware rivers as the interstate highways of their day. By controlling those water routes, armies basically dictated where the fighting happened. It became absolutely vital to maneuver troops along these waterways to protect political capitals like Philadelphia and to seize major ports just to keep those critical supply lines open. Simply put, without the water, an army couldn't survive.
Let's head south for Section 4, the Yorktown Peninsula trap during the Southern Campaign.
As we shift our map down to the Carolinas and Virginia, take a look at the stark contrast between the mindsets of these two armies. The British commanders came into the South fully expecting massive loyalist support to just rise up, join their ranks, and help sweep the countryside. But they severely miscalculated both the terrain and the people. The Patriot fighters, on the other hand, utilized their geographic mobility and their deep knowledge of the southern swamps, forests, and backwoods. In key fights, like the brilliant tactical victory at the Battle of Cowpens, they used the land to their exact advantage. They wore down the British forces and built incredible momentum to strategically herd them north toward Yorktown.
This relentless geographic maneuvering leads us right into one of the greatest tactical traps in all of military history, which begs the question, how did the literal shape of the water, specifically the Chesapeake Bay, trap an entire British army?
While the Yorktown Peninsula effectively became a locked door,
General Cornwallis backed his battered British troops onto that peninsula expecting a fresh resupply or maybe an easy rescue from the sea. But he didn't account for the unique shape of the bay. That specific geography allowed the Allied French fleet to sail right in and completely bottleneck the British ships. With the sea entirely walled off by the French Navy and George Washington's Patriot forces tightly surrounding Cornwallis on the landward side, the British were suffocated. He had absolutely no safe exit. It's a true masterclass in using geography to your advantage, and it effectively won the American Revolution.
That brings us to Section 5, Prove It with Maps. This is your homework application.
Now it's your turn to step into the boots of a commander, become the cartographer, and prove you really understand these complex strategies. You're going to follow these clear steps to complete your map assignment. First, you'll label key battles like Lexington, Saratoga, and Yorktown. Then, you'll draw out that brilliant Yorktown trap with arrows, making sure to include the French fleet blockading the bay. But definitely pay close attention to step number 5. As you write your explanation, remember that turning a simple list of battles into a cohesive historical story requires proving that supply lines, driven by those rivers and roads, are just as important as battlefield bravery.
And finally, Section 6, Education, Morality, and Peace, the Godly Learner.
As we wrap up this explainer, we really need to connect our historical education to our spiritual foundation, which is the absolute core of the HeroesMart Academy philosophy. You know, history isn't just a list of facts, it's a guide for living. The road to American independence shows the incredible power of cooperation in the face of impossible odds. So as you work with others, whether that's in your classes or your communities, you should actively practice these specific moral traits. Embrace the truthful, bold speech of Thomas Paine. Model the steady, resilient leadership of George Washington in the face of harsh winters and setbacks. And seek the peacemaking wisdom of Benjamin Franklin to constantly serve the common good.
Speaking of Franklin, his brilliant diplomacy overseas perfectly mirrors this vital biblical instruction found in Romans 12:18, which tells us, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. We're really called to use our talents and our education not for selfish gain, but with deep humility and unshakable integrity, actively pursuing peace in every single situation.
Here at the HeroesMart Academy Godly Learner series, we intentionally intertwine biblical morality with education. And why do we do this? Because education without morality will ultimately hurt you and those around you. Seriously, what's the point of being highly educated and tactically smart if you just use that knowledge to make destructive choices that cause pain? Romans 8 verses 6 through 7 promises true peace of mind to everyone who keeps their mind spiritual, and that lasting peace is the ultimate goal of all our learning. I'm going to leave you with this final, crucial thought. The revolutionary commanders used maps, rivers, and rugged terrain to navigate the brutal realities of war and build a brand new nation. But as you look out at the complex terrain of your own future, how will you use the wisdom of your education, combined with the morality of your faith, to navigate the choices and the map of your own life today?